Hi, my name is Dean Walton. I'm from the University of Oregon. And today, during this SCGIS 2020 online conference, I'll be exploring the use of QGIS's 3.14 version, that's the Pi version, which just came out July 19th, so out just less than a month at the time of this recording. And with it is their new built-in animation tool called Temporal Controller. And this is sort of a new version of what Time Manager used to be, which was a plugin for other versions of QGIS, but now Temporal Controller is built in, and one does not need to add it as a plugin. I'll be looking at its use for illustrating pre, peri, and post-nesting bird movements within the HJA Andrews Experimental Forest, which is here in Oregon. So let me show you where that is so we get an idea of that. We'll go to Google Earth here. And here is the United States. You can see this light green here is the Willamette Valley, and there's the HJA Andrews Forest. So I can hopefully zoom into this right here, and we can begin to zoom into that. This area here is on the west slope of the Cascade Mountains. It covers an area of 6,400 hectares. That's about 25 square miles. And it was created as a experimental forest in 1948, became a long-term environmental research forest 1980. The whole area is predominantly conifers, and within that Doug fir. The whole area has burned within the last 500 years, so it's a mosaic of age classes there. And I am now going to leave Google Earth and go right into QGIS, and here we can see the outline of our experimental forest. And up above here, we get to see the animation tool Temporal Controller, which is accessed by the main attributes page. So the data that I'm using, it comes from a data set from Matthew Betts at Oregon State University, and specifically it's from a Frey, Hadley, and Betts project that ran from 2009 to 2016. And with that, they observed 71 birds out of 164 birds that are known from the experimental forest. And they set up a series of bird observation points. There are 184 observation points that are illustrated here, and they cover lowlands and uplands throughout the forest. And they recorded birds. Now, predominantly these are audio observations, but obviously some sightings too. The total number of observations is basically almost 104,000 observations. So that is quite a few out of those 71 birds. Now, if I look at those set of birds for a second, we'll go over here. We found that the hermit warbler was the most observed, whether auditory or visually, bird within the experimental forest, followed by Pacific wren, chestnut-backed chickadee, Pacific slope flycatcher, Swainson's thrush, and then something like the red-breasted nuthatch. And in this case, this bird is observed everywhere. So for an animation tool, this bird is not one that really illustrates a whole lot. But for some of the others, we have to see some very interesting patterns of their movements or the phonology of movements throughout the season. So I'm going to turn off the point locations here for the plots. We'll go in and take a look at that red-breasted nuthatch. Let me turn it back on for a second. So we see that pretty much, with a few exceptions there and there, the red-breasted nuthatch was seen everywhere within the forest. Now again, this is a period of from 2009 to 2016, 7 years. In order to use the temporal controller for a study like this, and to see the phonology of bird movements, what we want to do was compress those 7 years into one single year. So we converted the observations by date to day of year. So we can look at on any given day of the year from when the study first starts, and this is May 1st through July 15th. So that's the study period. And so each of those is a day of the year. So if I open up the attribute table for the red-breasted nuthatch and open up the attribute table here, I can look at my sequence here. And so I have a date here. So on July 3rd of 2011, which is the 184th day of the year, there was a record of a bird species that day. Now, again, in order to compress these into a single year using Temporal Controller, I have to tell everything that is actually occurring in one single year. And so I just arbitrarily picked 1491 for the year, just pre-Columbus. But that date really does not mean anything except that I'm compressing these into a single year. So one has to realize that that is sort of an artifact of what's going on. All right, so if I was to show how this bird moved over time, so here I go into our set of attributes, and now built into it, we see within our layer properties, we can go down to temporal. And what I need to do is click temporal up here, and then I can see that I have some other choices. Well, I have fixed time, but I have a single field with date and time. And of course, what you did not see in the attribute table is the exact format of the year and time, which is quite specific. So we have year hyphen month hyphen day hyphen space, and then we have 00 for hours, colon, 00 for minutes, colon, 00 for seconds. So we need to have that set up in the spreadsheet. And that can be a rather challenging thing to do if you're using Microsoft Excel to organize the data, because Microsoft Excel wants to alter that and not give you what you want. It wants to do things that you don't want it to do, and it's a real significant pain to manage things. You actually have to, I had to go into Notepad to formulate everything properly. So it's quite, that is the one big challenge here. And it's all, again, if you're using Linux and some other spreadsheet, probably won't have a problem whatsoever. So the other artifact that I do want to mention quickly here before we lose too much time is that the event duration, I have it by day, and we're going to keep things on for a period of 2 days. So even though an observation was just 1 day, the flicker rate of points coming on and off is just too fast for our, I think our brain to comprehend what's going on if it's just for that single day. So we have it on for 2 days, which is really just 2 moments of time versus 1 moment of time. So we'll hit apply there. And we should be in good shape. Single date and time. Okay. And now I can go up and play a response. I'll take off that. Our dots are still there for the location. We see our date range, and I mentioned the date range is from beginning of May to the mid-July. Let me just make sure that I have that as 0.01. That'll give us a slightly longer delay period for starting. And let's see, we have to zoom out a little bit, zoomed out too much, reorganize there, and now we can hit play. And now we should, over the course of time, see our bird observations begin to pop up. And they're going to be everywhere throughout the forest. So again, this animation isn't particularly helpful. So we're going to stop that for right now. Look at something a little more interesting. So let's turn off that one here. What might be more interesting really is Hammond's flycatcher, which really became quite interesting. So we're going to go to Hammond's flycatcher, and points there. They're hard to see on this background. So we're going to change our background here. We're going to drop in the bare land cover LiDAR coverage for the forest, and we'll just take off our background as we cover right there. And now we have a set of dots. The areas that are darker are areas where there's a higher density of birds. So we are selectively making the points transparent so that when they land on top of each other, they become darker. And what one can see right off the bat is that there is certainly a preference for low elevation and drainages for the Hammond's flycatcher. So that's a pretty cool thing. Now, also within QGIS, I have the ability to change not only the size and transparency of the dot, but I can change the color of the dot regarding time too. So what I've done here is that this is sections of day of the year. So we're looking at sometime here in, let's see, probably April going into July there. And what I've done is color coded things from we have a purple color, black, and green. Now, one within our color gradient, and I'll show you that too in a second. So if we go here, for this is again Hammond's flycatcher. We notice that something up here says all-sided flycatcher. When I have the full name spelled out, that means I've converted it to a shapefile. What's nice about Temporal Controller is that I can just actually add comma-separated value lat-long files into it and animate those. So here, where I have the 4-letter abbreviation, these are all just comma-separated value files that I have not converted to shapefiles. The old Time Manager animation tool required that these were in a shapefile format, but this one does not. And so I just used that as a way to determine what data set I'm actually using. So if I go into here, it's still just, it's not quite a shapefile, but I have made these things transparent, larger, and we have Time Manager set there. So let's get down to 0 back here. And let's see, make sure we have this all set up. Go to temporal there, we're good there. Excellent. The symbology, so I am picking a graduated type of symbology right there. And I'm using day of the year, which is called sequence in my setup. And then I have color ramp. I had to edit the color ramp from light to dark to light, which is the inverse of how QGIS wants to typically show things. They tend to like to have a lighter color in the middle and show the extremes, the low end and high end, as darker or brighter colors. But my interest was more nesting behavior, so I edited the symbology such that it was darkest in the middle, sort of the more the nesting period time. And then this area here in purple would be pre-nesting, nesting, post-nesting. So we're good there, hit apply, and I think we should be in good shape there. Hit OK. And now, again, things disappeared because it's ready to play. I go in here and begin to play my record. So let's see what we have here. Oh, and also I can put on a date. I'm going to stop this for 1 second. And I have, oops, go back here. And I have also added another file, which gives me that day of the month. So no longer, this is not showing the day of the year, but it's showing the exact month. So we have on May 18th, we have those records for those birds. So let's go back and continue to watch this. So things are more purple, so we're getting closer to the breeding period, which is going to be sort of really around June. And we can see suddenly we have a much greater influx along the creeks and drainages, so much higher density in that area. And then we have periods of dispersion where these things disperse throughout the forest, much broader and lighter points across the forest, before we move to a post-breeding period where things become much greener. So now we're entering a later period of the season. So that's kind of cool. So that's one example. I'll turn this off for a second. But I also may want to say, hey, do we have, how about interactions between two sets of birds? So if I was to look at, say, well, the olive-sided flycatcher, and let's make those records a little larger. We'll make that 4. Apply OK. And then turn this on again and see where we have interactions. The olive flycatcher tends to like typically the higher elevations, where again, we know that the Hammond's flycatcher likes the lower observations. So that was sort of a cool finding for us here. I'll turn those off. And we can look at, say, well, let's see, I mentioned spotted owl. So let's go look at spotted owl for a second. So, this is a rare endangered species. So we'd love to know more about this one. But again, we only have those records right here for this species. So it doesn't really give us, we can't determine a pattern of anything here. But we can say for something like a sooty grouse here versus a ruffed grouse there, that we have some other patterns. So let me go animate those guys for a second. And we're going to turn on temporal controller there, single date and time, sequence, apply, OK, and took on our sooty grouse. And same thing, activate that, single date and time, sequence, date, apply, OK. And then we can watch the patterns there of these two species. And again, habitat overlap or habitat division. And we see that the sooty grouse tends to favor the lower elevations, versus the rough grouse going for the higher elevations. So this is all I wanted to cover, and I thank you very much.